A new House Judiciary Committee investigation is looking into the details of the Internal Revenue Service's visit to the home of Twitter Files journalist Matt Taibbi. In a letter to Internal Revenue Commissioner Daniel Werfel from yesterday, Representative Jim Jordan writes, the IRS's production shows that the IRS opened its examination of Mr. Taibbi's 2018 tax return on December 24th, 2022. The same day, Taibbi posted a Twitter Files report. Joining us to tell us about his IRS investigation is Matt Taibbi himself. Welcome back to Rising.
Thanks for having me, Brianna.
So Taibbi, the obvious implication here is that there was some retaliatory move by the IRS to investigate you because of their dissatisfaction with your choice to report on the Twitter Files. Walk us through what happened.
Well, so this originally came up the day I testified before the House Weaponization of Government Committee. After I testified, you might remember that was kind of a circus. I took the train home from Washington, and when I got to my house in New Jersey, I found that a note had been left in my door. My wife told me that an IRS agent had been to our home. I sat on that information for a few days, not knowing what to do about it, and finally was sort of advised to tell the committee about it because I would have been remiss in not informing them of a possible effort to intimidate a witness. But I didn't think really that it was that. I thought it had to be some kind of coincidence. It was too silly to imagine that they would be trying to get in my head over this story. But so I didn't comment then, and I said I wanted to wait for answers from the Treasury Department. But the stuff that came back from the letter from Jim Jordan, when they told me the date that they opened the case and what the case was about, the date was December 24th. That's Christmas Eve, a Saturday. That was a very big day in my life. That was a moment when I put out a story I was actually a little bit afraid to publish about ties between Twitter and intelligence agencies. And it was it was a Saturday. It was Christmas Eve. And the issue was a 3-year-old, to me, I think, fictional issue that they had never talked to me about before. So that was very concerning. And there's some other concerning stuff in the report, but that was a big alarm bell for me.
Yeah, I remember when that Twitter Files report came out because I was thinking like, oh my God, these major scoops on holidays. Why do you keep doing this to me, Matt Taibbi? So for government, regardless of what you think of government bureaucracies, the idea that they're working overtime on the weekend on Christmas Eve, just doing kind of the day-to-day basic maintenance on an old IRS case is beyond any possible reasonable belief, right? It's not conspiratorial at all to think it's related to the work you were doing when it just seems so overwhelmingly unlikely that like in the normal course of IRS work, that would be the time for an investigation to launch.
Yeah, I can't think of an innocent explanation for it, especially when you couple it with what the issue is. One of the reasons that I told the committee, they originally, when they left the note on my door, told me not to call for 4 days. Apparently, that's a tactic. They like to let you stew over the weekend and wonder what the problem is. When I finally called them, they told me that the issue, one of two issues, was that my 2018 electronic tax return had been rejected due to identity theft concerns. Now, that made me nervous because I had never heard that before, and it seems like that would have come up over the course of 4 years or whatever it was. And when we got the information yesterday or the other day, what they said basically was that they were opening a brand new, they were like assigning a new date for an investigation over that issue, which they had not, by even their own admission, taken up for over 3 years, which is beyond the statutory exemption, and was a fictional issue anyway. So that kind of, for me, leaves no doubt.
Yeah, so when you reached out and asked, you told the committee about this and asked for some explanation about the timing, what was going on here, raising concerns about retaliation, you were told, am I correct, that the gap in time was because during the pandemic, folks weren't making, IRS agents weren't making field visits. Does that rationale hold up in your thinking?
Well, it seems a little silly. I don't think the pandemic would have prevented them from sending a letter. And by their own admission, they didn't do that over this issue. They claim to have sent me 2 letters about this, one in October of 2019 and one, I guess, in January of 2020, or at least 2 communications. One of them was a letter. But they didn't produce either of those. And in the interim period, I didn't hear anything from them, even by their own admission. So there's that. Then there's the fact that it's not, even by anyone's standards, it's not a serious enough matter to warrant a home visit. So all of that stuff, you combine it. I don't like to sound conspiratorial, but it's hard to draw any other conclusion.
Yeah, and given the fact that you got that kind of warning letter from Stacey Plaskett about how lying under oath was a criminal offense, not that you did, of course, lie in any kind of purposeful way while you were testifying, but many people looked at that letter as kind of openly in a form of intimidation. So this doesn't seem so far out of line with the kind of thing that Congress members have shown themselves as willing to do.
Right. I mean, the step that that Representative Plaskett took, and according to Lee Fang's reporting, didn't just involve her. There were other members of the leadership that were involved in composing that letter to me, which accused me, threatened me with a 5-year prison sentence over, really a typo. Essentially, I mean, it was a mistake for sure, but that was sort of overtly threatening. This is a little more concerning to me, though, because it suggests that somebody in another agency got on the phone and called the IRS, because none of the reports that I did, I mean, they touched on agencies like the CIA, the FBI, the DHS, the ODNI, but they weren't about the IRS. So it's hard to imagine what the sequence of events could have been here.
Yeah, and that is what, your reporting, which we've talked about a lot on this show, has shown, is this level of interaction between various government agencies and then other forces, social media platforms, the media itself, in a way that concerns a lot of us from a free speech standpoint, from a civil liberties standpoint. And you and Michael Schellenberger and others have been bringing this to the public's attention, including talking to Congress about this. It's so interesting, and I think very disturbing and sad, that it's taken on such a partisan kind of lens. I mean, the only people, frankly, interested in this are, a lot of independent leftists like my esteemed co-host here. But from a party standpoint, it's Republicans, when the underlying concern shouldn't really be partisan, because a lot of these agencies, these are agencies that were operating under Republican administrations, that involve people who are not, properly part of the Democratic or Republican consensus. You would think there could be, Democrats could object to what they're seeing without, impugning or throwing the Democratic Party under the bus or something like that. But what has emerged when you're testifying, Stacey Plaskett's just, one voice among many from the Democratic side that seems so, not only like disagreeing with you slightly on how the framing is, but wholly rejecting that there's something inappropriate here. In fact, they're suggesting the inappropriate behavior is not, suppressing more speech or fighting misinformation harder or something like that.
Or it's mine,
Right.
I think
right.
Right. I think that's one of the ironic things about even that particular report, which was, it was called Twitter and Other Government Agencies. We had gotten a stack of reports that had been passed through the Foreign Influence Task Force to Twitter. In some cases, we knew which agency they came from. In some cases, they didn't, but we didn't. But one of the things that was interesting was that it wasn't all about the right. There was a lot of stuff in there about, for instance, pro-Maduro supporters in Venezuela. There was stuff about the Yellow Vest movement in Europe. There were some leftist groups in Africa that were on some of those lists. And we talked about that some, in the reports. But yes, I didn't really see it as a partisan issue. I thought it was scary on several levels. First of all, why are so many tech companies in regular communication with the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force? And then there was the sort of anti-competitive behavior aspect of it, which I thought was really striking. This idea that all of these companies were getting together and having kind of private codicils on speech and, what was going to be presented to the public. That shouldn't have been a partisan issue either. I thought that was disturbing, but no, I mean, that was one of the things that was frustrating about this.
Now, you've written so compellingly over the course of your career about corporate corruption, the kinds of ways that money in politics undermines our democracy. And given the fact that we just had this unprecedented presidential launch last night on Twitter, and you are perhaps the most famous of the Twitter files journalists, I wonder what you make of the whole setup, the technical issues that ended up happening, the kind of optics of a presidential candidate allying himself so closely with not just Elon Musk, who obviously is one of the richest men in the world, but David Sachs, another congressman, kind of called in and said, hey, Elon, I love you. I bought a Tesla. The optics of that kind of very close personal relationship of politicians and people of wealth and power. What did you make of the whole thing last night?
I don't see that as terribly different from what goes on NBC, CNN, or even Fox, for that matter. They're attempting to create, I think, a third or new pole of media, or a new pole of politics. But of course, it has a look to it that I think is off-putting. One of the criticisms of that event was that it was pitched, it was going to be this open dialogue, there was going to be all this back and forth, but really it was just kind of a lot of craven bootlicking of the two people involved. And so there wasn't a whole lot of sort of vibrant media exchange that went on there. However, I disagree with the criticisms that I saw online, a lot of which were, how can you, criticize old Twitter for suppressing the Hunter Biden story and then turn around and do this? I don't think that's an apples to apples comparison. But they would justify this on the grounds that they're at least open about it. I don't know about that. I think I'm more and more coming to the conclusion that if any of these platforms have owners, there are always going to be problems.
You have testified before Congress at, I think, the invitation of Republicans. There's this, House weaponization of the federal government committee. So much information has come to light, and what I'm wondering is, what is the realistic likelihood of action? Because Republicans will do this thing where they care a lot about privacy and civil liberties and free speech when, for instance, FISA courts are going after Trump and Trump people, but then everybody, Republicans and Democrats, like with Thomas Massie dissenting or something, votes to reauthorize Patriot Act stuff over and over again. Is there, and maybe the answer is no, and that's just depressing, but is there any evidence that it's sinking in on either political side that it's not just about them out to get you or your people, but letting the government have these tools is just dangerous regardless of who's in charge and who it's affecting, and there needs to be legislation to stop that?
That's a great question. I mean, I think we've all been through the process of being fooled sometimes on the other side of the aisle, where we get excited because we think that there's actually going to be movement on some really important issue. That happened to me multiple times after the financial crisis, where I thought, there's a small group of politicians on the blue side who are really upset about, for instance, too big to fail issues and the bailouts. And there was a moment there where it looked like the whole party was going to get religion about doing things like breaking up the banks, or prosecuting, white collar crimes. And it just never happens. As you say, there's always this kind of, one vote away moment where it just doesn't happen. So I'm cautious about that. I went through now with Russiagate. I remember talking to a number of Republican members at the beginning of that whole scandal who seemed, I thought, genuinely to be getting religion about FISA. I think some of them were actually really shocked by what they found out. But you never know how real that is and how they'll vote when the time comes, and whether this is just opportunism. You have to hope it isn't, but there's nothing else you can do.
Yeah. Last question from me, Matt. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about the announcement of the new Twitter CEO, Linda Yaccarino, who comes over from NBC Universal. Some people who are very much fans of Elon Musk were frustrated by what felt like a more establishment choice. Others say this is an expected and reasonable choice for someone whose primary concern is building up advertising revenue again. Did you have any thoughts?
Well, I don't really know what was going on there, but I do know that Twitter was having a tremendously difficult time with advertiser boycotts. And that was massively impacting the company's ability to project out into the future that they would ever be profitable again, or that they would ever be in the black. And from the outside, it certainly looks like a decision to bring in somebody who's going to smooth the transition to rolling back some of those boycotts. But what does that mean? I don't know. I mean, it's not, from my point of view, it's interesting that, the Twitter file stories kind of ended right around the time that a lot of these changes started happening. But it's hard to say. I know there were a lot of people who were very, very disappointed by her appointment, and the optics of it. From if you're a free speech champion, or you're worried about the quote unquote censorship industrial complex, it doesn't look great for sure.
Matt, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me on.